it wasn't Joseph's seed, so why are they tracing his seed back? That
One of the two problems that Christians have with this passage is, why does Joseph matter when it's not his son? One of the other commentators raises that question. And interestingly enough, the genealogies are different between Luke and Matthew. Luke also includes a genealogy, and he also claims that it's the genealogy of Joseph. So why would they put Joseph in there?
Didn't the Old Testament say they were from Jesse?
They needed to authenticate Jesus' lineage back to David, because they said that out of the stem of Jesse. But
didn't Mary's lineage go back to David too, or not?
I'm not sure. I think we've wondered that question before, and I've meant to find out, and I really don't know. It's unlikely that Matthew went to the Mormon temple to check the accuracy of the genealogy of Jesus. But what he did is he went back each step so that he could ultimately trace Jesus' lineage back to, and it was important, it had to be, as Helen said, through David, because David is the one from whom it came, and because David was also a legitimate king. David was a legitimate king of Israel, and Matthew needed to prove to people that Jesus was also a legitimate king, even though we understand the way that they were kings was very different from one another. So Matthew didn't really care if he was accurate or not. He needed to trace the lineage back for reasons other than putting together an accurate family tree, which would appear in a historical document that you give your children. Part of it was to show that it's part of the unfolding history that no newcomer just showed up and said, "Hey, I'm the Son of God," and it isn't like God just sort of dropped this person upon earth like an alien and said, "Here I am," but rather that there is a history of the unfolding of God throughout history, that Jesus was part of God's plan from the very beginning of history. And then the other problem, besides the one that Helen brought up, why do we do it through Joseph instead of Mary, since it was a divine child anyway, and Joseph had nothing to do with it? One of the questions, thoughts is that, and I don't know that there needs to be some sort of public legitimacy also. I mean, even though it may have been conceived by the Holy Spirit, they had to establish a legitimacy for Joseph's presence with Jesus, just in terms, I would think, in terms of the social culture of the world. You can't just say, "Oh, this is my bastard son who was conceived by the Holy Spirit." I mean, Mary would be out in the woods in a minute, even if Joseph had been willing to stand by her, because what Joseph did by standing by her was actually...
Legitimized.
Pardon?
Legitimized.
Right. I just realized there's one major discrepancy here, one major disconnect for me between the story of the angel appearing to Mary and the angel appearing to Joseph. Can anybody think of what that is? Remember the story of the angel coming to Mary. Anyone think about it? Put it together. Imagine the scene back there with Mary and Joseph. What's the problem with this?
It didn't say she was asleep. I don't know.
No. That's right. She wasn't. That's right. I think he just appeared to her. But she found out before she was pregnant that she was going to bear a child conceived by the Holy Spirit. Joseph already knew she was pregnant, and to be righteous decided to divorce her quietly. What did Mary do? She never told Joseph. It's like Mary never told Joseph, "Hey, by the way, I'm having a baby by the Holy Spirit." Or he didn't believe it. But there's no mention that Mary ever told Joseph. He knew she was pregnant. Don't you wonder what he thought?
That's a gross understatement.
And how could she have told him, whatever she told him, was believable enough that he agreed not to make a big scene like he should have by Jewish tradition, and still he needed an angel to come tell him where this baby came from. So help me with this. Why would that have happened?
Maybe you didn't really believe her. Oh, yeah.
Oh, honey. It's just two people telling the story from two different perspectives.
Well, they could have had, if he dreamed it, okay,
Uh-huh.
if she was visited by an angel,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't have to necessarily have to be a connection.
Well, except that he already knows she's pregnant.
Well, he learned that through the dream.
No, he
No,
knew
before
before.
that.
He's had already decided to divorce her because she was pregnant.
Yeah. and
Says
then
so
he-
right here.
and Then he had the dream, yeah.
This doesn't, it doesn't,
Well, it doesn't make, the whole thing doesn't make sense anyway. That's not set up.
And the truth is that it wasn't quite as bad as it would be today, although, no, not today, because today, anything goes, 20 years ago. Because they were betrothed, which was in some ways almost like being married.
Betrothed doesn't mean being married?
Betrothed means being engaged, but not married. They're not married, but you're betrothed for a year. You make the same kind of commitment as if you were married. It's just that the wedding feast takes place a year later and lasts a whole week long. So that it wasn't like they were just kind of messing around in the backseat of the car at the drive-in movie or something. React more strongly and shun Mary, but he didn't. But by quietly divorcing Mary and then eventually by taking her his wife, he was disobeying Jewish law. So the question is, when are there times that it's sometimes disregarding a law like this is acceptable? Can you think of any instances when it's okay not to obey the law, as Joseph did not obey the law here? Be it the law of the land or the law of faith.
You mean,
What about, okay, so now what in our own, can you think of any sort of civil laws that are in place that there might be times when you have to break the law in order, the laws as stated in order to obey God's law? I can think of a dumb little one. When we were visiting my parents one summer, my dad was having some health problems. And my mom woke me up and said, Dad's having trouble breathing. I'm going to drive him to the hospital. Well, I said, no, I'm driving him to the hospital. So I get in the car. Dad's sitting there going, barely able to breathe, and says, you're going over this speed limit. I said, I honestly think that if we were stopped by a police officer, it would be okay for us to be rushing along since you're not breathing.
What about the doctors years ago that did abortions that was against the law?
Lots of doctors, that's
I
right.
don't know whether it's
That's
right or
right.
wrong, but they did it anyway.
Knowing that it was against the law, because they felt in their hearts that this is what they had to do. Whether we agree with them or not, they didn't do it as scofflaws, but because they felt like their responsibility was bigger. And I think probably in the medical field there are a lot of people who are in that position.